What is up, people? It is peak week number 3, and yeah, here we are. We're getting very close to competition now. I'm recording this after the fact in peak week number 4, but what we're going to do today is we're going to touch on recovery and how you can leverage different variables to maximize that so you perform better in your training sessions. But first, we're going to do a listen recap and we'll see how we got on this week. So as you can see, squats were tough. Now, last week I actually could have done with taking my own advice, which I'm going to discuss here today. So prior to my squat session last week, myself and Emma went on a hike, which, you know, probably not the best idea. I did probably about 6,000 to 7,000 steps more than I usually would, up hills. You know, after my legs were noticeably sore, woke up on Sunday noticeably sore and stiff, and like while the warm-ups felt okay, did not necessarily perform as I wanted to on my top set of squats. So 245, it is the heaviest I've squatted in well over a year, so that is encouraging. However, it moved a little bit slower than I anticipated based off how fast 235 moved the prior week. Bench moving well, happy enough how that's going. I have remedied a little bit of elbow pain, which I'm going to discuss how I did that in this video, as well as my deadlift. Deadlift is going quite well. I'm really happy with how that 280 moved. That's only the first time I've actually ever pulled 280. I've only pulled north of 275 once, which was last year in competition, which is 287, which is my PR. So I'm really happy with how that moved. My grip did start to slip a little bit. Now the bar that we have in the gym, that is the Leco bar, has a little bit of a softer knurling, so it's a training bar. So the training bars typically have a little bit less of an aggressive knurling versus the competition bar. So today I'm going into deadlift to do my heaviest deadlift, and I'm going to use a slightly sharper bar to see if it helps, because, you know, I'm pretty confident that I can hold on to that weight. You know, if it's slipping out my hand, I can't really prove that, can I? So you'll find out next week how that goes. But today we're going to discuss recovery. Okay, so we're like, what even is recovery, right? So the way I think about recovery and how I define recovery is your ability to perform better or maintain the same training performance in your next session. Okay, it's not necessarily soreness, it's not necessarily related to like muscle damage as such. In my opinion, that's how I am trying to think about recovery for powerlifting, because you can go into sessions and feel a little bit sore and still perform really well. Even though we know that these are things that can affect your resistance training performance, they are not necessarily always going to be indicators that you're going to have a subpar performance. It's very common for people to go into training sessions, warm up, and then once they warm up, they have the blood flow going in their muscles and they're able to perform better. And it's also not your perceived fatigue. So coming into the session and feeling a little bit tired. So after maybe a long day at work, or yeah, again, you wake up in the morning, feel a little bit stiff, and you feel a little bit off. A very common thing is people on the way to the gym, or before they go to the gym, they're like, oh, don't want to go to the train, I feel bollocks. They get into the gym, they start warming up, they perform, and they hit a PR. Okay, how often does that happen? It happens almost more often than you feeling great and going into a session and hitting a PR. So these are not necessarily things that I'm thinking about in terms of recovery. I'm thinking about what can I do that is going to have the most notable impact to help me perform better in my next training session. So now that we've gotten that definition out of the way, or how I at least define it, what are the variables that we can leverage to help us recover better between sessions and have an effective training session? What we need to think about here is we need to think about load management. It's like, what the fuck is load management? Well, load management is just having your training plan in a way that is not beating you up so frequently that you need to take deloads, or that you really need to do anything drastic in terms of recovery modalities. Okay, so ideally we want training blocks to like last as long as possible, right? In the kind of context of a powerlifting trainee, you may want it to last all the way up until until you're like time to hit your peak condition, for example. Now, if you are having training blocks which are lasting like 2-3 weeks and you're feeling bollocks, that could be a case that you are just not recovering adequately between sessions. Maybe you're doing too much, you're training with too high volumes, you're training with too high intensity, or even like the variations that you're picking up in your training, they could be beating you up a little bit too much. Now, as a powerlifter, one of the big things that we can leverage, because we are generally very driven by the weight in the bar. We want to lift heavy. That's what the sport is all about. And it can be very common when we have a lot of our competition exercise within a program that we have PRs attached to these competition lifts. Now, this can do a few different things, right? This can make us push harder in training sessions than we need to, and it can lessen our ability to train lighter during sessions where we're meant to be keeping lower intensities. It's very common for people to overshoot their RPE within a powerlifting context. So what can we do in this case to manage load? Well, one of the most effective things we can do is we can use variations. So variations of our competition lift, you think of even just changing the bar placement on your squat. So going from low bar to high bar, to front squat, to safety bar squat, to changing to like a camber bar squat, buffalo squat. There's lots of different bars, especially bars, that you can use that will change where the bar is on your back, or where you have to control your center of mass, and that will change the loading demands of the exercise in regards to different muscle groups, but will also change your ideas as to what weights that you can lift on that bar. Okay, it's very common if you have a completely new exercise put into your program that you've never touched before, you're unlikely to go as heavy as you can your first week. What do most people do? They take a little bit of load off the bar, they pick a load that they can comfortably do for their sets, and in the following week they increase the load. What does that do? Well, in that week or two where they're gradually building up to more challenging weights, they are reducing the overall intensity of their program, and they are managing their load. They're giving their body a little bit of a chance to recover, adapt, and repair to the demands that they're placing on it. So this is one of the uses of variation, and these can be very, very effective, especially if you're somebody who does get very emotionally attached to a weight or to certain PRs that you have certain rep ranges, or if you just constantly overshoot your top singles or your top sets, for example. For myself this week, I've been noticing since running low bar twice per week during this peaking process, my elbows have been getting really, really aggravated. To actually effectively manage that, like prior, I would have just followed the program blindly and just like did whatever my coach told me, whereas like at the moment, I'm kind of doing my own programming for this meet. So I am like, okay, like I don't want to be doing all my bench sessions with my elbows falling off me and being in pain. It's just going to ingrain bad movement patterns. So how can I lessen the strain on my elbows while still being able to bench pretty effectively? So the way I triaged the program was, okay, my elbows are most triggered after doing my secondary day of low bar squats. That's when they are most triggered, and then that kind of seeps in through the rest of the week. So what did I do? As opposed to doing low bar this week, I did a safety bar squat. What does that do? Well, it changes where my center of mass is going to be. I'm going to be a little bit more upright, but main thing is I'm not going to be in that crank back position here all the time where I'm going to get a lot of strain through my elbows, and I can bring my arm up around the front, hold the handles, and still get in some squatting patterns. So I'm thinking about degrees of change from the low bar, that it's not terribly different, but it's slightly different and still allow me to get in some good squatting volume. So in that scenario, I've now managed the load, I've reduced fatigue on my elbow tendons, and now I'm able to train bench more effectively leading into the competition. I'm going to be able to perform better, hopefully, on my bench sessions up until the competition too, and I'll be able to manage fatigue a lot better. Now, number 2 is going to be nutrition, and this is an obvious one. I discussed it in my last video, so go back and watch that. This is a no-brainer if you are a powerlifter. If you are eating less calories than you need to keep up with the demands of your training, you're not going to perform well. If your body weight is consistently going down, you're not going to perform well. Leverages are going to change. If you are not eating enough protein, you're not going to be supporting the muscular adaptations that you need to grow and recover between training sessions. If you're not eating enough carbohydrates, you may not necessarily have the fuel on board to perform as well. So nutrition is a massive one. You could do an entire video on itself. Go back to watch the last video. But if you're looking to recover better between training sessions, nutrition has to be on point. Training at maintenance or a slight surplus, having above 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight of protein per day, and with the likes of your carbohydrates, like at minimum, I would say 3 grams per kilogram of body weight is probably what you should be aiming for. But you can see people having all the way between 3 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight for carbohydrates. That's really going to depend on your total energy needs across the day. So without spending too long on the likes of nutrition, sleep, like it blows my mind when I hear of people not taking their sleep seriously when they are trying to be an athlete or they're going to the gym. Okay, if you're a natural lifter, sleep is your steroids. But if you have a bad night of sleep before a training session, you are not going to necessarily have the worst training session. It might be a small decrease, but if you are sleeping less than 5 to 6 hours per night, you are not going to be in a position where your body is ready to adapt and recover between training sessions, either acutely or long term. There are studies where they have looked at the effects that will have on your overall body composition. People who sleep less will tend to have a little bit more fat mass than muscle mass. There is going to be effects on performance. So people who have sleep restriction, they may not necessarily have too much of an effect to 1RM strength on a subsequent day, but they may have it over the long term. And if you're training with higher reps or higher volumes, your recovery and performance is more likely to be impacted by sleep deprivation. Now, when we think about how strength is generally built, well, we generally build strength when we're operating in the moderate volumes, to be honest. Like we don't necessarily build strength by just doing singles all the time. Now, if you are suboptimally recovering because you're not sleeping enough, that is likely going to impact the strength gains you can have over the time. Now, you will hear a lot of people say, oh, well, I don't need enough sleep. I feel grand when I sleep less. And yeah, acutely you may, and it could be a case that you just don't really know what good feels like. We do know that over time, sleep restriction is going to be a net negative for your health. It can increase the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's and dementia over time. So while you may say that now, if you want to continue lifting into your later years, potentially, maybe not the best idea. Now, when we think about using sleep to our advantage to recover better between training sessions, what we want to try to think about is optimizing our sleep environment as well as sleep hygiene. So what we can think about in this scenario is having a very consistent wake and sleep schedule. So every single day across the week, you wake up and you go to bed at the exact same time, even on weekends. It's not really that difficult. And once your body clock starts to adapt and get into this rhythm, you'll probably wake up automatically without even needing an alarm clock, and you'll probably start feeling asleep anyway towards that later time in the evening. Now, this can be offset by social jet lag, which is generally at the weekend when people decide they want to stay up much later and sleep in a lot later. That generally over time leads to people just feeling a little bit less energetic throughout the day, even though you would think that you are getting a little bit more sleep in the morning from sleeping in. You'll have much better stable energy throughout the day and probably better training performance if you keep that sleep schedule as fixed as possible. Now, when it does come to keeping the sleep time fixed, because that's generally what most people struggle with, is getting to bed on time, there is a massive case of just being disciplined with it, right? You're a fucking adult, go to bed on time, right? But that's not necessarily the most helpful thing either here. So what I generally recommend people do, and something I do myself, is make bedtime inviting, okay? What I do is I have a good book that I'm looking forward to read. I generally have a hot shower, especially when it's warm like it is in the summer right now, because that will allow you to lower your body temperature and get you in a better mood to start sleep. On top of that, I probably recommend trying to cease electronic usage about an hour before bed. Now, personally, I don't necessarily follow that advice as such, but I'm in bed usually about half an hour before I actually fall asleep. So in that time, I'm having my hot shower, I'm reading my book, and I'm trying to shut off from the outside world. Now, when it comes to reading books, I do kind of recommend using a fiction book because they can be a form of escapism. If you're reading something that's very information heavy, it can be a little bit kind of hard to read at night when you're trying to shut off your brain, for example. Other big ones as well, which can disrupt your sleep, is eating far too close to bed. Now, this is a challenge as well if you are training in the evening time, but if you're training in the evening time and you're going to bed very soon after, it could be a better idea to schedule most of your food earlier on in the day, and then when you get in from training, just have a protein shake, for example. But I generally recommend like about an hour and a half before bed. That should be your last feeding for that day, because if you eat too close to bed, you're trying to digest food while you're also trying to sleep. The two processes don't necessarily always work the same, and this is something that I consistently find with myself and my clients. When they eat too close to bed, they don't necessarily have the best sleep onset, so they start going to sleep a little bit later, and then as a result, when they get up in the morning because they have obligations to go to work, whatever, and if they wake up at the same time, then it's a lot harder for them to get up. They feel a lot more lethargic, and then as a result, they have poor sleep quality and they don't perform better. And a big one for me as well is making sure that my environment is cold, dark, and cool. So for that, I make sure I wear EYEMASKS, get blackout blinds. They're not very expensive and they're very easy to install. Second one is earplugs. But if you live in a noisy environment and that's not enough, you can buy a noise box. And noise boxes are very cheap on Amazon. They just play white noise. It's very consistent. It's a little bit hard to get used to at the start, but it will develop in your brain some kind of pattern that is going to help with sleep onset. Then probably a big one as well that people suffer from with sleep and keeping their sleep consistent is drinking too much water close to bed and waking up a lot during the night to go to the bathroom. So generally, we're trying to drink a decent amount of water throughout the day, and that's obviously going to be very important for performance and recovery too. So trying to get in around 40 mils per kilogram of body weight across the day, that is going to be beneficial for myself. That's like about 4 to 5 liters. I'll try to drink most of my water throughout the day, and then as I come up to bedtime, I'm really tapering that water intake down, that fluid intake down, because if you drink too much water close to bed, you're going to wake up during the night, and that's going to disrupt your sleep. That can disrupt the mental sleep cycles you get in, and therefore you may not necessarily recover as well overnight, and then you may not necessarily perform better the next day. And then we have just stress in general, right? So some people are highly stressed individuals, and some people just have stressful lives, right? So we have to consider stressors overall. So training effectively is a stress. Your work is a stress. Your family life is a stress. We could consider your financial situation a stress too. So there's lots of different factors here that can contribute to your overall stress stress levels. Now, one of the reasons why having such high stress and chronic stress is net negative is because generally when we're trying to recover, we're trying to get into our body into a parasympathetic state. So a parasympathetic state is when our parasympathetic nervous system is highly activated. Now we have this thing called the autonomic nervous system, which is a nervous system that we don't necessarily have a lot of influence or control over the organ systems that are underlying it. And we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is like our fight and flight response. Parasympathetic is like rest and digest. Now when we are highly stressed, or when we're just stressed in general, whether it's psychological or physical, we're undergoing sympathetic nervous system activity. Think about when you get under the bar for a heavy squat and you start to get like really anxious and you're fucking fired up, right, ready to go. That's similar to if you just got hit by a car, right? A lot of physiological processes that are happening within your body are the exact same. Now, when you are experiencing that too, you could have that at a lower hum, but still have a lot of those physiological processes going on by just even opening a triggering Instagram message. Now, if we consider that we have lots of these stressors going on throughout the day, if you have a stressful relationship, you have a low sense of purpose and you don't really feel like you have meaning in your life, if you have a shitty job that doesn't pay well, or if you are not able to pay the bills, a lot of these things are contributing to your overall stress tolerance. And all of those stressors, that does contribute to how well recovered you can be for your training session the subsequent day. If you have this very low hum of sympathetic nervous system all day, you will not necessarily be getting yourself into a parasympathetic or rest and digest state, which is going to be more beneficial for promoting recovery, for promoting the adaptations that need to be taking place in regards to muscle mass, right? So when we think about the processes of like anabolic and catabolic, sympathetic is all about like catabolic and breaking things down, right? Releasing nutrients like glycogen, free fatty acids, and sending them into the bloodstream so they can be taken by the muscles to use for energy. When we are thinking about anabolic, we're thinking about harnessing that food that's coming in after we eaten it after an amazing workout and utilizing that food to be stored as glycogen or to aid in like the recovery process in regards to like building muscles, for example. So if you're always in this kind of catabolic state, you're never really giving your body a chance to recover. And if you don't have the chance to recover, well, how do you expect to perform well the next day? So while it does seem like there's a lot of things here, a lot of the strategies to actually lower stress are pretty simple. You have the likes of just simple meditation. Very common. You can buy something like Headspace app and learn how to meditate. Personally, I don't do it. It's not my jam. You could journal. So journal, getting your thoughts in your head out onto a piece of paper. It can help sharing those stressors with other people. It's a very common expression to hear, a problem shared is a problem halved. I completely agree with that. For me, I'm a very low stress individual, so I don't necessarily use a lot of these kind of techniques themselves other than reading something like the Daily Stoic on a daily basis, because something like that is enough for me to try to help me reframe stress within my life. Generally, my approach to dealing with stressful situations is, can I do anything about it? It's like, if I can do something about it, then I'm gonna fucking do it. I'm gonna try to change my situation, right? Because like ultimately, if I have control over it, why not do something about it? If I don't have control over it, well, then I can just change my perspective on it, right? How can I use this obstacle for me? How can I leverage this downside to be an opportunity, right? If you read any of Marcus Aurelius' teachings, the famous quote is, you know, the obstacle is the way. And that's how I view a lot of these things. Now, not only do we know that this heightened stress can influence, you know, your recovery between sessions, but it can also influence things like your sleep at night. If you're very anxious going to bed at night, your sleep quality is probably going to be lower because you're going to find it very difficult to get to sleep. Or you could wake up in the middle of the night or wake up earlier because you are thinking about that kind of stressful thing that you need to do, right? Like even in this kind of scenario, as I mentioned, mind dumps, journaling, they can really help. Planning out your day, the day prior, to have a to-do list so you are unloading your mind with this kind of stuff, that can all help to lower your stress. But high stress can also affect your appetite. Some people have a more ravenous appetite, some people have their appetite being lowered, and that can affect the amount of energy that you eat throughout the day to recover effectively for your training sessions. Now, these are the big picture items that I personally look at when it comes to recovering session to session to improve my performance, and we could probably do another video on all the different recovery modalities that there are, because this video is already going on too long, so I'm not going to spend my time going through them. But relative to the aspects I just mentioned there, load management, nutrition, sleep, stress management, like anything you do, any type of pill, potion, vibrating dildo that you jam into your leg, like they are unlikely to be as effective as those huge variables that I just mentioned there. So if you can take anything from this video, it is to not necessarily waste your time all the kind of colorful gimmicks. A lot of the stress reduction or recovery modalities that are going to be most effective are generally going to be boring ones and require a lot of effort to actually do them, but they are going to have the biggest return investment. So hopefully this video video has helped you and you have some things to take away that are going to help to improve your nutrition, your load management, your stress, your sleep, and hopefully have better training sessions. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and we will catch you in the next one.